Welcome to the lifestyle segment of Women to Watch. I'm Cheri Morrison. Today I have the pleasure of introducing Amanda Owen, author, executive director, and co-founder of the Justice Bell Foundation. Welcome to the show, Amanda.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really glad to be here.
We're really happy to have you here. You brought to life a story that I just can't seem to get over. It's hilarious. I'm going to jump right in because we have a lot to talk about. You've written a couple of books and you co-founded the nonprofit organization called the Justice Bell Foundation. In 2015, you were doing some internet searches because there were some rumors circulating about putting some suffragists on the back of a $10 bill. You set out to learn more about that, and you ended up reading a small mention of something called the Justice Bell, and that took you in a little bit of a different direction. Please tell us about that path.
Yeah, boy, did it take me in a different direction. And in fact, it was, there was all of this news that Harriet Tubman was going to be on the front of a $20 bill. We're still waiting. And so there was discussion about some other bills. And it was really when I was kind of Googling that, I thought, let me just learn a little more about this. And it was a very small mention of something called the Justice Bell that was used to promote votes for women's suffrage for a Pennsylvania campaign in 1915. And I thought, oh, how odd. I've never heard about this. As it turned out, through my kind of deep dive research, this bell, 2,000-pound replica of the Liberty Bell, it was called the Women's Liberty Bell or the Justice Bell. It was so famous that news of its travel was splashed across every headline throughout our nation. Tons of articles kind of following this bell that was essentially used as a branding tool to kind of bring out crowds, to get the men interested, and hopefully to vote yes on a referendum that was going to be in the 1915 election in Pennsylvania, to vote that women of the state of Pennsylvania could vote. And so I thought, this is, such an amazing story the more I heard about it. And I asked around historians, teachers, librarians, have you ever heard of the Justice Bell? And everybody said, no, what's the Justice Bell? And I thought, I can't believe, 100 years ago, this bell that was so famous, kind of an icon of the women's suffrage movement, and now nobody knows about it. And then I was flabbergasted to learn that it was sitting in the rotunda of a bell tower in the middle of Valley Forge Park at a little chapel called the Washington Memorial Chapel. And that was within driving distance of me. And I thought, well, let me go out and see it. I was a writer, as you mentioned. In fact, I was working on another book at the time. And I drove out to see it. It was this kind of magnificent bell, not a whole lot of information about it. And I noticed a kind of a used bookstore on the reverse side of this, bell tower. And so I walked in there and I asked the woman who worked there, I said, do you have any information about the Justice Bell by any chance? And she said, what bell? And I said, the one about 10 yards from here on the other side of this wall. I said, that huge bronze 2,000-pound bell. She said, I have no idea what you're talking about. And I walked away from that encounter and I thought, I can't find anybody who has heard anything about this. And I thought, maybe I'll write an article. I called my agent at this time. I said, I think I'm going to put off this other book. I'm going to do some research on this kind of new thing I found out about. And it seems in no time at all, I ended up co-founding a nonprofit. The Justice Bell Foundation now brings the story of the Justice Bell and the women's suffrage movement to schools and institutions. Ended up making a film about it. So it's really kind of taken over my life. It's kind of, to me, this is a woman's story, kind of put on a pedestal, dragged around the state on the back of a truck, and then lapses into obscurity. and not celebrated or even really known anymore. So that's kind of become my mission.
Yeah, I mean, before that even happened, before it got to the Valley Forge Park in that
Yes.
bell tower, Katherine Wentworth Ruschenberger
Ruschenberger, yes.
Ruschenberger
Hmm.
commissioned to have the bell made. And after it made the rounds in Philadelphia and all, it ended up back at her home, and then in a field for 50 years.
Yeah, I mean, what happened was after this, huge 5,000-mile journey that was like celebrated and reported on um, through all 67 counties of Pennsylvania. And then it actually went to Chicago for a parade. It went to Washington, D.C. I mean, it was really kind of, people wanted to see this bell. It was a really big deal. Um, Finally, in the Pennsylvania referendum failed. The men of Pennsylvania decided to deny women voting rights. And in fact, at the very same time in New York and Massachusetts and New Jersey also had a referendum. It failed in all 4 states. And that was really when, kind of women's eyes turned to Washington, D.C., where there was a lot going on to try to get a federal amendment. So that kind of this exhausting slog of state by state by state, trying to get women the right to vote. People thought, let's just really put our energy toward a federal amendment, or, this isn't going to happen or it'll take forever. So finally, in 1920, the 19th Amendment was passed and added to the Constitution. 3/4 of the states had to ratify. Tennessee was the last one to ratify, and by only 1 vote. And it was a 24-year-old state legislator, Harry Burns, whose mother told him to vote for women's suffrage. He actually wasn't going to do it, but he did. And so that's why we have the 19th Amendment. And so in 1920, the Justice Bell was brought to Independence Square. It was, thousands of people came to the celebration, people from all over the state. The mayor made a speech, the governor made a speech. Katherine Wentworth Ruschenberger, who was kind of the custodian of the bell, made a speech, the who's who of the women's suffrage movement. Very big deal, front page news. And then there were plans by the women for the Justice Bell to stay near the Liberty Bell. And by the way, in the celebration, the bell was rung for the first time, symbolizing women finally being given the voice, the vote. So they wanted it in Independence Square to remain there. But the mayor at the time, Mayor Moore, not a fan of women's suffrage, he actually had it carted off to a kind of slaughterhouse, warehouse, sheep shearing station, of all things, and to be destroyed. So
Yeah.
Katherine went and rescued it, got it out of there. The men of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania denied, the Justice Bell being able to remain there in Philadelphia. And so it's like they tried to find, Katherine and the suffragists tried to find a place of national prominence, someone to take the bell. Nobody was interested. And finally, this brings us back to Washington Memorial Chapel. There was a Reverend Burke at the time, and he was a great collector of things, and he had a vision of these kind of American history museums, and he collected all kinds of things. Katherine was not associated with this church. It wasn't hers. But he agreed to take the bell with the idea, I assume, to put it in one of these, museums that he was going to build. However, he died in 1933 before the bell could be displayed. The bell was left out in the woods there in Valley Forge for decades. All of the reverends that came in behind Reverend Burke were not interested. And it was not, so this was back in the 1930s. So finally in 1992, kind of the hero of this story, Reverend Richard Lyons Stinson, He was the new rector at Washington Memorial Chapel. His mother had been in the League of Women Voters. He was a history buff. He came upon the bell in the woods, did some research, understood its significance, and had it brought into the bell tower. He was there only till about 1996. After he left, the bell just kind of fell into obscurity again. There were a couple of things here and there that happened to bring some attention to the bell, but the bell was largely ignored. And it was for another few decades. And it was really when I looked at this mention of the Justice Bell in 2015, and for the last few years have been, giving presentations, and again, films, school programs, just wanting to educate not only the people of Pennsylvania, but of the nation, about just all of the incredible stories of the women who fought for voting rights, who just have extraordinary stories. A film should be made about each of these women. And just, I really wanted to kind of use the bell, which is always fun to talk about a bell, to kind of open up this discussion of the fight for voting rights.
Yeah, I mean, the words "established justice" were engraved on the side of the Justice Bell, and that was to announce the completion of democracy, because the Liberty Bell announced the creation of democracy. So it was like completing the goal of democracy. So then the bell is in Valley Forge Park, and we're about to celebrate again, and the bell is going to be moved, and this beautiful bell just is not meant to be. What happens next?
Well, what happened was, actually before 2020, which was the centennial of the 19th Amendment that passed in 1920, there was a lot of kind of work to bring attention to the 19th Amendment, to the cause of women getting the vote. But of course, then the pandemic happened. But prior to this, through the Justice Bell Foundation, we partnered with the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts to have a replica of the Justice Bell made. So the Justice Bell was a replica of the Liberty Bell. And so we thought, let's make a replica of the Justice Bell so that we can get that on tour to go throughout the state to museums and institutions, schools, historical societies, again, as a way to kind of bring attention. So we had that program with the replica Justice Bell start in 2019. In 2020, the Justice Bell at the Washington Memorial Chapel was put on a truck, was not secured properly. It was going to go down to Independence Square, even though we were in the middle of a pandemic. It would be a small audience, but it was still going. But it fell off the truck, kind of rounding the first curve. And so the platform, the carriage, the yoke, damaged, well, destroyed, and the bell damaged. They got the bell down to Independence Square for a small ceremony. And then it just disappeared, and nobody could figure out where the bell was. I asked around. I mean, literally nobody, just could not get information. It wasn't back at the chapel. It took quite a while and some digging, but finally learned that the Justice Bell, there's kind of nothing on the website anymore, nothing about it. Turns out it's in Ohio, at the Verdon Bell Company. And so don't know when it's coming back to the Washington Memorial Chapel. I'm just so glad that we have our replica bell, which right now is in Fort Washington, at the Upper Dublin Public Library, and is due to go to the Delaware County Community College in Media on March 21st of this year, 2023, where it will be exhibited for a year. And we will be bringing lots of presentations, the film, and stories about the women's suffrage movement to the students and to the public there.
That's great. I mean, you've created so many wonderful programs. You've written a couple of books, which we mentioned briefly. Unfortunately, we're out of time. The first of the books was Power of Receiving, a revolutionary approach to giving yourself the life you want and deserve, and Born to Receive, 7 powerful steps women can take today to reclaim their half of the universe. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so sorry we're out of time. That's why I wanted to get into this quickly, because there's so much.
That's quite all right. And we have websites, justicebell.org, amandaowen.com. So certainly people can go to our websites to learn, more about both the books and our nonprofit.
So thank you for joining us. For more information about Amanda, her books, speaking engagements, go to amandaowen.com. For more information on the Justice Bell, where it is on display, speaking engagements, and where you can make monetary donations to keep these programs going, go to justicebell.org. Both of Amanda's books, Born to Receive and The Power of Receiving, are available on Amazon. Yes. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Sue will be right back to close out the show. Ladies, keep living your dreams.